All right, so next speaker is Leigh Messenger. Hope I'm saying your name right. She's a PhD student at the University of North Texas.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Leigh. I'm going to change a little bit. I love all the biosolids, super interesting. Had no idea there was going to be a couple of others. So this is really looking at unintended consequences, kind of go over highlights. It's really highlighting why the science is so important and how consistent policies, laws, and regulations can really make a difference. So I'm going to hit a little bit of background just in case anyone is not familiar with biosolids. So basically, you take sewage. It can be residential only or combined with industrial. It's sent to a wastewater treatment plant. The liquids are separated, and then it's treated. And it can be called sludge, biosolids, sewage sludge. Now, the federal government has a level for all of this that states have to abide by. It can be land applied to get rid of it, landfilled, incineration. So those are the main ones. There's also another, like some injection, but not as often used. So they're divided into two categories, Class A, Class B. This is the general category set. Different states, which can make it confusing, have different categories. For example, there's an AB category that only exists in Texas. And so the U.S. EPA estimates there's about 4 million dry tons generated in the U.S. And when you're talking about the Class A, it's about 50% of the market. And typically when they process it, they will pile it up, and then later it will be loaded into dump trucks to deliver to the fields. This can be a little bit of a problem when you're talking about a very windy state and dry conditions. And so the problem comes into play not with the biosolids. They're useful. They have nutrients for the soil. A lot of farmers want to use them. But if you think about what goes down the drain, so we're talking about, this is just household. And all of this goes into the wastewater treatment plant. Now, it depends on the wastewater treatment plant. None of them are the same. There's federal regulations to remove certain things, but the other things can be optional depending on local municipalities. And so whatever doesn't get removed unless there's some type of natural degradation process, it's going to more than likely get left in the biosolids, how we're seeing like microplastics and PFAS. This is an interesting point is the global biosolids management market is really increasing because historically biosolids were a waste that had to be paid to dispose of, and now there's a market for it. And based on, depending on what market report that you're looking at, currently it's valued in 2025 about $1.82 billion. It's expected to increase by 2030 to at least over $2 billion. It is a global market. The U.S. is the largest market, and the volume is increasing primarily due to urbanization. So the problem is that it's global and fractured knowledge, laws, policy, and regulations. There's all different varying laws that can be really hard. When I'm looking into this, one city in Texas has a 400-plus page report dealing with biosolids, and then you have another town that is simply going by the base level federal government requirements. But to go through every city or municipality and try to read all these reports or to even find out if they have one is really time consuming, and people just get overwhelmed. You do have, haven't seen anything as whether it's going to increase, but there is a slight import-export market where some states are shipping biosolids to another state or they're importing biosolids from a different state, and you've got varying regulations there. It's a very tiny market at the last report that I saw, but with the global market increasing, we don't know. And there's varying levels of knowledge. This is a problem. I saw one Tennessee farmer that was quoted in the news as saying she wasn't worried about biosolids because they would go up into the plants and just get taken care of and go away. So we've got a problem with just the knowledge. So what happened in Johnson County? I was honestly really surprised with this because if we look at Maine was dealing with this issue in agricultural lands in around 2016. It was a huge problem. And honestly, I know I'm reading this all the time, so I really thought, oh, hey, this is a big deal. Most people know about it. What happened in Johnson County, though, population of only about 210, was biosolids, and I'll get to that, but I would like to just point out one thing that's kind of important. There's about 288,000 acres of ranch and farms there, and that has been declining because around the Dallas-Fort Worth area has got expansive growth, and we are losing ranches and farms at a rate that is just crazy. I think 3 of them just got bought up recently. I've got one down for me that's now being developed into a huge multi-story housing project, and we've got another one that's going to have, I think, 4,000 plus units put on it. So agriculture is still very important, though, to Johnson County, even though DFW is expanding. So in 2022, there were complaints that there was air quality problems due to the biosolids. They believed that was smoking. I'll have a picture of that in a moment. So I have a picture of Grandview, but most of the properties, you can see around it is mostly agriculture, and most of the properties are located outside, of course, the small area of the town. But Grandview isn't that far from actually downtown Fort Worth. I mean, so the question here was, there were definitely visually biosolids being applied on a farmer's property, but the surrounding properties had effects going on that they were attributing to the biosolids, particularly the air quality, because you could see it smoking and it was coming into their property. And so environmental crimes investigator was sent out due to the complaints. So what she found was there was multiple human illnesses that they weren't really sure where it was coming from. Some of it was from breathing in. You can see the smoke on the biosolids there. So there were multiple animal deaths, deformities, and stillbirths. The issues had been going on for some time. There had been multiple complaints filed at this point. When they started doing the testing, these were insane amounts of PFAS levels in the fish. They found one at 74,000 parts per trillion, one at 57,000 parts per trillion. These are enormous levels. One of the stillborn calf livers had tested at 610,000 parts per trillion. That was a stillborn calf. Now, the reference range, as we saw earlier, for drinking is 4.0 parts per trillion. So the problem is, where did this come from? So the thought was biosolids because the strange part of this is it seems that they decided to look into the biosolids because of the smoking part, but they weren't actually aware of the PFAS. So that was interesting to me that the environmental crimes investigator actually had to look up and research PFAS, and the ranchers had never heard of it. So Senegro had started in 2020 taking over the contract for Fort Worth biosolids because there had been multiple complaints about the odor because they had been applying biosolids before this. And Senegro did a good job and got rid of the odor and all of that. Then the whole issues, the complaints came up, and of course Senegro had taken over this, so they're the focus of the investigation. So they were processing the waste from the area, and they dispute the levels that were tested. They did their own investigation, and they said that from their investigation, the PFAS levels that they found did not in any way support that it was their product that caused it. So here's the thing, regardless of, all of this is going to court, it's going to have to hash out. There's disputes over the data, there's disputes over testing. But the problem remains is, one, if it didn't come from the biosolids, then where did it come from? These are enormous amounts. There's wells, there's soil, there are animals. It's a major problem. And so Johnson County tried declaring a state of emergency in February of 2025 because of the levels of PFAS. Unfortunately, this is where our policies really can matter. They came back with no help because there was no law or policy that actually could help them. And so rancher Tony Coleman has about 300 and something acres, and his quotes to the media, and he has repeated this, and we've seen this in Maine as well. He said, we're nervous, we're scared. You have your whole livelihood taken from you. He didn't know what PFAS was until 2023. He's lost, and I believe it's higher now because this has continued, but he's lost over 47 cows, 2 horses, and 5 ponds of fish. There were fish kills prior to this investigation, but they didn't know the cause of them. So the situation now, there's ongoing contamination still. They don't know what to do with it. There's multiple lawsuits. That would just take an entire presentation too. The Attorney General's suing, all different types of things. Senecar's contract was terminated early. Fort Worth is having to pay over $2 million out to Senecar for terminating the contract. There's been trying some House bills, and this is extremely high level because this is just kind of crazy complex, but there's some House bills that just died in committee, which means they got introduced and then they just didn't go anywhere. One of them was for a health study, and they couldn't even advance that past committee. And the biosolid testing, there isn't any right now. The House bill that would have had done that just got stalled out. There's a lack of communication. People really feel forgotten and a lot of confusion. So unintended consequences here, you have an increased disease risk, you've got arguments over proof and effects, you've got a loss of income. The agriculture sector already is running on thin margins with all of the costs and all of the problems. They don't have the money to deal with all of this, and they can't sell their animals, or they won't sell their animals because they don't feel like putting the PFAS into the food chain because they don't know, and they're worried they're going to get sick. You've got neighbors against neighbors because some people want to use the biosolids because they are beneficial to the land, but you've got other neighbors that are scared to death of you're going to poison me, and they don't actually know what else is in the biosolids. They've had increased use of resources for lawsuits, mitigations, flying all over the place, loss of trust, animals euthanized. There's just broad financial and economic impacts. And again, the incorrect or incomplete information is causing some of this fighting because there's no testing, nobody knows what's going on. And then honestly, they're not really trusting. I mean, we've already got so many problems in that area. We're in a water crisis. Texas is running out of water. There's land use problems with eminent domain where data centers are also coming in. They're fighting to keep their land for that. Then they've got the PFAS going on. And they're just not sure how to deal with all this. And they're not very trusting of the government or people who are telling them things right now, especially when data center, with all that, they're using non-disclosure agreements. So some of the considerations is that you've got an increased disease risk, and I'm not going to get into it, but there's been a common stance historically is that the presence of a pollutant doesn't necessarily mean there's a risk to human health. And this is really hard to overcome. You can look at many examples like the Gulf War, how long it took to diagnose and to actually get veterans help on that because nobody believed them. Many of them were told they had psychological problems. Coleman's father-in-law died from a liver disease, and he wonders if it was the PFAS. He just doesn't know. And so then the chronic stress that they're under combined with everything else, I mean, just that alone will trigger molecular and immune changes. And they've got it at all different levels, and they don't know what they're going to do. So disease risk is really complex. So this is just driving, we don't know what this is going to do. Chronic conditions are on the rise, and there's so many different factors. But we really need the science and the testing and the good policy and the laws to support people to avoid some of these consequences. I mean, looking forward, you know, the things like simple things like definitions and word choices matter, how we're framing issues, how we're treating the neighbors, you know, who want to use biosolids versus those that don't. And it really boils down to we don't know what we don't know. And one of the big issues as well is we don't know what they think. We don't know what they perceive. We don't know where they're getting their information. How can we talk to anybody and convince them of anything if we're not even sure what they know? I'd love to go out. That's one thing I'd like to do is just to go out into communities and find out what it is that they know where they're getting their information. Because, I mean, just asking my research group if they saw information on PFAS, I was a little surprised. Only one person in my entire research group ever saw anything in any of their feed about PFAS. So, but thank you. And questions?
Hi. One question. The water from the wastewater treatment plants, where they take the biosolids, has been analyzed?
So that was the problem, is it never was prior, and it has been now in the investigation. And that's where Synagro is saying that it doesn't support it, but there's an entire argument over methods and the data collection and the time period that's occurred. So it's kind of a mess because there was nothing prior to that put in place.
Thank you.
We don't have more time for questions, but you can talk to her later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.